this is a terrorist attack. It is an attack which has the specific intention of creating terror. The news that's coming out at the moment is that his injuries are quite extensive. He may have harm to his vision. There is a possibility that he may lose vision in one eye. It seems, at this moment it's unclear, but it seems that the reasoning behind it was actually the execution of that old fatwa going back decades when he published satanic verses. And each of us has to ask the question, are we now in a world where lines written decades ago result in an attempted murder and a terrorist attack? This is beyond normal behavior. We have good sanskar in our civilization. Wherever Sanatanis, whichever part of the world we go, it's our sanskars, our dharmic sanskars, which guide us to be so accommodating, to be gentle, to be productive members of society, to help and support. And those sanskar have been under attack for decades, under the guise of entertainment. Bollywood was actually an anti-dharmic sanskar factory. It was spewing ideas into the atmosphere, which are polluting ideas. And the intention of those ideas has never been anything other than to continuously portray anything which is adharmic, anything which is non-sanatani, as being superior, to be aspired, to be admired, all of those things. And anything which is traditional, cultural, civilizational, uniquely Bharatiya or part of our Sanskriti, that was always criticized. It was always made the butt of jokes and denigrated. The intention was always to reduce our impression and our respect for our ancestors and ourselves. And it's heartwarming to see that in such a short space of time now, we are seeing enough people mobilizing to be able to say no and to work together and to participate in a community and indeed a nationwide act of civil rejection. So this is almost like another Satyagraha 2022, which is beginning to happen. And that's great to see.
Namaste and welcome to Citti Media. I'm your host, Vaibhavi Naik, and I welcome you all to today's show. Today, we are joined by an esteemed gentleman who is no guest to us here at Citti. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to welcome our very own Pandit Satish K Sharma ji. Namaste, Pandit ji.
Pranam ji, namaskar Vaibhavi ji, and how delightful to be on a session with yourself. So I've been admiring your work for a while, and it's a real joy for us to be doing this together. Thank you for the opportunity.
That's very kind of you to say, Pandit ji. Let's dive right into the questions. Let's start with the latest news. On the 12th of August, we received the news of the Indian born British American author Salman Rushdie, who was stabbed at a lecture in New York. This has sent shockwaves, especially across the literary world, because not only is he a celebrated author, but this incident can be rightfully described, as an attack on freedom of speech. So, what do we make of this whole incident?
Gee, it's a tragedy on a scale, I think, which we're only now beginning to realize. Firstly, this is a terrorist attack. It is an attack which has the specific intention of creating terror. Right? It was carried out in a particularly brutal manner. It was carried out in a location which was supposedly secure and a place where freedom of speech could actually be exercised. And it was carried out on a person who has a global stature and is hugely respected. It seems, at this moment it's unclear, but it seems that the reasoning behind it was actually the execution of that old fatwa going back decades when he published satanic verses. And in that whole book, there wasn't a chapter that was a problem. There was actually only a couple of lines in one paragraph which was a problem. And so, this is broadcasting to the world. And each of us has to ask the question, are we now in a world where lines written decades ago result in an attempted murder and a terrorist attack. This is beyond normal behavior. This is nothing to do with religion. This is certainly nothing to do with divinity. This is nothing to do with humanity's journey towards connecting with the divine creator. This is something totally different. And I think that we have to come to the decision collectively that religion cannot be used as a get out of jail free card to excuse and shall we say, soften the most outrageous behavior. It's a real tragedy. The news that's coming out at the moment is that his injuries are quite extensive. He may have harm to his vision. There is a possibility that he may lose vision in one eye, as well as other very severe life-threatening instances. And so we do send him our best wishes. But more importantly than our best wishes, I think we have to encourage everybody to reflect upon the degree of tolerance that's being extended to terrorists purely and solely because they masquerade as religionists. This is the question for our leaders to address with urgency. Unless it's addressed, these things have a habit of escalating, of proliferating and becoming normal, becoming what we're accustomed to. And I'm hoping that Salman Rushdie's case is one where we can redress this and say, no, this is not normal. This is an aberration. And the source has to be identified. The manner of his radicalization has to be identified, and it has to be nipped in the bud. So let's send our best wishes to Salman Rushdie for his speedy recovery.
Absolutely, Panditji. One of the other most popular topics in India right now. This week, we saw the release of the film Lal Singh Chaddha, which has already faced controversy even before it's released. It's always been the subject of a boycott movement. But from the reviews that are coming now, we see that the people who did watch the movie came out and also spoke against it. So, what is
Ah,
your take? What is your take on this, Panditji, and why do you think this is happening?
well, I think it's a wonderful confirmation that as a civilization, we are putting up defenses against what are clearly psychological operations designed to harm us, to undermine us, to demean us, to reduce our self-esteem, all of those things. We are a civilization who gave the world the idea of sanskar, those deep rooted truths that we accept. And we have good sanskar in our civilization. Wherever Sanatanis, whichever part of the world we go, it's our sanskars, our dharmic sanskars, which guide us to be so accommodating, to be gentle, to be productive members of society, to help and support. And those sanskar have been under attack for decades, under the guise of entertainment. Bollywood was actually an anti-sanskar, anti-dharmic sanskar factory. It was spewing ideas into the atmosphere, which are polluting ideas. And the intention of those ideas has never been anything other than to continuously portray anything which is adharmic, anything which is non-sanatani as being superior, to be aspired, to be admired, all of those things. And anything which is traditional, cultural, civilizational, uniquely Bharatiya or part of our Sanskriti, that was always criticized. It was always made the butt of jokes and denigrated. The intention was always to reduce our impression and our respect for our ancestors and ourselves. And it's heartwarming to see that in such a short space of time now, we are seeing enough people mobilizing to be able to say no and to work together and to participate in a community and indeed a nationwide act of civil rejection. So this is almost like another Satyagraha 2022, which is beginning to happen. And that's great to see. I am hoping that very soon, not only do these agents of chaos find themselves so confined as to become impotent, but also an element of justice and redress is sought from them. They have amassed a huge amount of wealth, a huge amount of power and influence, and they have done so at the detriment and to the harm of the indigenous Bharatiya civilization. And that harm shouldn't be just ignored. You know, Hindus, we are encouraged to chodo, koi baat nahi, chalega. But that is not how one secures a just future. Without justice, there is actually no mechanism to prevent a continuation of the abuse that has been inflicted to date. So it's a great development. I'm really hoping that Bollywood, the swamp that Bollywood has become, will be drained and drained very, very rapidly. It's an uncomfortable thought, but there are people in Bollywood who name their children after mass murderers, people who openly inflicted devastating genocides on the Bharatiya people. And yet they seem to think that that's okay. In Germany, nobody would dream of naming their child um, Adolf or something associated with the genocide. And yet Bollywood seems to think it can. I think Bollywood probably needs to rethink now because it can't.
It's actually a sight to see, Panditji, especially for us who know and who have felt so misrepresented, so angry about being presented in this way, and having to listen to everybody that speaks about us based on Bollywood representation. And it's so weird. Sorry.
No,
It's so
I was agreeing. Please continue. Yeah.
And it's also very ironic to think that, arts, performing arts, theater, natya shastra, it is it is something which is it's not a fundamental concept, but it is a significant concept in Hinduism. It's revered, all forms of arts, in fact. And Bollywood has used this power to be able to create something, to be able to deliver a message, to let people think badly about this very culture, which actually encourages their existence. It's
Yeah,
ironic.
you mentioned the Natya Shastra, and I recall even Salman Rushdie making a remark once about how the oldest and the first recorded statement about freedom of expression was actually in the Natya Shastra. And he told the story about how the devas assembled to protect the stage and prevent the Danavs from attacking the artists who the Danavs were not very happy at the manner in which they were being portrayed, as one would expect. They're Danavs after all, and the last thing they like is a mirror being shown to them. But the principle was established that artistic expression must be protected at all costs, and that's the price to pay. And I say it's just a strange and terrible coincidence that we're talking about freedom of expression in Bharat, while Salman Rushdie, who really applauded and worshipped that freedom, is lying in hospital in a devastating state. Another thought that occurred to me is that in Britain, the last person who was executed for treason was actually a character who used to broadcast. His name was, his sort of nom de plume was Lord Haw Haw. And he used to broadcast radio messages which were intended to demoralize, which were intended to cause a loss of spirit and courage in the British population at the time of the Second World War. And so the importance of messaging, the importance of recognizing the harm that can be done by people who have access to movie, film, radio, etc., that is an importance we need to recognize. It's very, very critical at this time. And as I've just mentioned it, we have an awful lot of people who use freedom of speech to do exactly what Lord Haw Haw did. The only difference was that Lord Haw Haw functioned at a time when war had been declared. We are now in a time when war is apparent. It hasn't been openly declared, but this is the manner in which war is conducted at this time, asymmetric war. So I think it's worth our Bollywood directors and producers that they reflect on this issue. There is a need to build the civilization. They need to stop undermining this ancient indigenous civilization, and the civilization will reward them or punish them according to their choice.
Absolutely, Panditji. Very nicely put, Nilpal. We spoke a little bit about UK. Let's expand on that discussion. Um, Protests asking the government to tackle the cost of living crisis are in full swing in the UK. Rails are disrupted because the train drivers are on strike, and there are at least 50 more rallies that are planned to happen around London in this coming week. And another point to be noted is that the food banks in UK, they are witnessing this never seen before influx of people. This has been in the news since the beginning of the year, but currently, as we speak now, it's at this all-time high, which is shocking for a developed country like the UK. Now, what does this imply, and what can this lead to?
Mm. They're great observations, Vijay. Um, there are a couple of levels to this. You're absolutely right in that we're getting one piece of news after another piece of news after another piece of news here in the UK, all of which point towards a society under stress, under duress. There are deeply seated movements occurring, and the cracks that are appearing on the surface now, they have their roots in many purely British attitudes, traditions, and history. So you're right about poverty. There is a huge gap between the haves and the have-nots. In my living memory, I have never seen such a gap. But there is a more worrying issue, and that is that those who have power and wealth, they seem to be completely ignorant of the gap that has developed. You know, I'm reminded of the onset of the French Revolution when Marie Antoinette was told that the people have no bread, and she said, well, if they have no bread, let them eat cake. You know, there is an element of that becoming apparent in the British ruling classes. Now, as students of civilization and very long range history, there are a couple of things that are now becoming obvious to everybody. Firstly, Britain masquerades as a democracy, but it's beginning to be felt now by the population that the democratic processes that occur in Parliament are actually theatre, that it's a drama to keep them engaged, and it's like a soap opera that's played out with passionate speeches in the houses and everything else, but not necessarily reflecting the needs of the people, not actually trying to address the problems and the challenges they face. So people are beginning to look and say, well, hold on one moment. We thought we were a democracy, but so many things are happening which we have never had an opportunity to express our democratic choice. The imposition of COVID constraints was, it saw the loss of human rights and freedoms which had been accumulated over centuries disappear. Those rights disappeared in a matter of weeks. There was no democratic process there. People are seeing that the manner in which food distribution is occurring, the variety of choices of very expensive wines and caviar, and if you go through to Knightsbridge and see the explosion in exotic cars and Rolls Royces and Bentleys and everything else, that's not as a result of democratic choices. And so there is a sense now that in fact this was a sham democracy. I've called it a fake democracy before, that in fact what we have in Britain is the old theocracy, the church and its power pyramids and its Ponzi schemes, the old monarchy who have conditioned the people to believe that they are loved and looked after by one family who happen to have a really good life at the in exchange for this paternal love and beneficence that they shower upon us. And people are looking at them with a new set of eyes. They've seen what happened with Prince Andrew and his connections with Epstein. They've seen series after series of questionable transactions. It's come out that Prince Charles only recently was given a brown bag containing millions of dollars. And it was a very shady sort of a deal. So the population is beginning to say, well, one second, we have put our trust in the institutions of state, in the parliamentarians, in the monarchy and the theocracy. And frankly speaking, it's beginning to feel as though that trust was misplaced. The authorities and the people there is an ever widening gulf that's appearing. This is a very interesting time, as the Chinese curse says. The Chinese have this curse: may you be born in interesting times. And I think for a lot of people, it's becoming a real struggle to try and work out what is going on. The sentiment that I'm picking up the most is probably a penultimate sort of a step before civil disorder. And that is, people are asking, they are saying, why do we pay taxes? These people have shown that they are incapable of running an economy to our benefit. The state of the economy is devastating. The interest rates are rising. The queues in front of doctors are ever increasing. The police are, shall we say, almost on a daily basis being found to not have the interests of the public at heart. We have all of these terrible cases running into the millions of actual crimes of abuse of young white girls up and down the country. And yet the authorities are not holding anybody responsible. So there is a huge gulf between the population in the United Kingdom and the institutions of state. And the moment the British people decide, okay, they are not a symbiote, the governance processes and the institutions of authority are not symbiotic. We're not having a win-win relationship. What we're actually experiencing is a parasitic relationship, where the state now views its own population with a parasitic lens. And that is a problem. When that happens, invariably, the population says, right, we're not paying any more taxes. We're not going to pay our bills to these incredible companies who are making huge profits, billions and billions of profits, more than they have ever made. And yet we are being told that we have to foot additional costs. There is a story which is becoming seen now as a fiction, and that is it's a difficult position for a nation to be in. It's been a long time coming. Remember, the British state was established on piracy and global slavery. It wasn't established on trade, which is what they had sold to everybody. And when you have foundations which are so inhumane, it's only a question of time when the facade begins to crack and crumble. And one of the earliest population who the pirates of the British colonial time enslaved were actually the people of the British Isles themselves. The English, the Irish, and the Scottish and the Welsh were themselves enslaved by these very affluent pirates. So a huge Samudra happening here in this tiny little island. And I think it's just a question of time now before we as Hindus have an opportunity to really step up. I'm a great believer that a small number of dharmic, courageous people can step forward and lead and participate in the affairs of state and make a big difference. Let's see. We have Rishi, who has suddenly appeared on the scene. We have Priti Patelji, who's also on the scene, and other prominent Hindus in power, in positions of significant power and influence. And I think their sanskar will start to come to the front now. So I'm positive. Change is always difficult, and for a country to move from a theocracy, a monarchy, into a genuine democracy is not an easy transition. I think this is what we're witnessing now.
It's very nicely put. And what of the Prime Minister race in the UK? What are the latest updates on that?
Well, they say a week is a long time in politics. They used to say a week is a long time in politics 20, 30 years ago. Right? And then with the advent of technology and Twitter and all of these instant messaging applications, a day became a long time in politics. A lot would happen within such a short time frame. And we've still got the best part of a month to go before the results are announced. And between now and then, we have the hottest summer. We have one of the most severe economic crises. The pressure is mounting on a daily basis for the system to produce a leader. And yet the system is not noticing it. It's almost like Westminster's bubble. They're playing this student union election sort of campaigning. Universities, you have students and societies who organize their elections. It seems to be that Westminster is doing that, and the whole nation is on hold. So I'd be very surprised if this went the whole distance and the nation had to wait for what, 80,000 people to make a choice? The results are not out until September the 5th. So that's a long, long time for a nation to wait, especially under these circumstances. Within that time frame, as I say, we have the best part of a month to go yet. I think we've probably got about 5 weeks now. But in that time frame, the two candidates are being subjected to unholy scrutiny. Every word, every gesture, every facial expression, what they're wearing, the length of Rishi Sunak's trousers, the color of his socks, everything is being commented upon. I don't think there has been ever a time when politicians were scrutinized as much as they are. Every word they have ever spoken is now being interpreted and reinterpreted. I remember in the French Revolution, Cardinal Robespierre, in fact, not Cardinal Richelieu, he said, bring me 4 sentences, any 4 sentences written by any person, and I will find them guilty. Okay, and the press seems to be operating under Cardinal Richelieu's philosophy, which is hound, pick, scratch, scrape, do everything possible to tear these poor people down, and then let's see who will survive. I have never seen such a vicious journey. Of the two, I think it's becoming apparent that Rishi is actually made of sterner stuff. He's certainly more resolute. He's certainly more stable. He's a better and stronger debater. Boris Johnson's biggest strength was his capacity to debate in the House of Commons, no matter what was happening. And it is a gladiatorial exchange that's occurring now. Liz Truss, I think, is losing credibility. The image that she was presenting is now cracking a little. We're going to end up with some very tribal decisions, I think, to be honest. In 5 weeks, we will see all of the fancy, what are the policies? What's his policy on the fisheries? What's his policy on nuclear deterrent? All of those sorts of conventional conversations, they will all have disappeared by then. And people will get back, I feel, to their tribal loyalties. And if they get back to their tribal loyalties, then I think we will see Rishi possibly unsuccessful at this time and Liz being selected. I don't think that's a bad thing, though. I think, bearing in mind there's an election in only 2 years' time, even if Rishi is not successful, his footprint in the nation, in the Conservative Party, has now been established. He has got a very strong presence. And sooner or later, I think he will come to the front. So for us, is as Punjabi says, dono haathon mein laddu, right? It doesn't matter who will win, we will win sooner or later.
Thank you for those insights. Panditji, now another topic we need to discuss is China, our friendly old neighbors, which continues to misbehave. But earlier this month, we received the news that the Dalai Lama, who is currently on his visit to Ladakh, was honored with the Dupal Rangam Duston honor, which is the highest civilian honor in Ladakh. Now, is this a message that the new India is trying to send to China over what it's doing in Ladakh in the LEC? We'd like to know your thoughts
Yeah.
on.
Isn't this one of those momentous times in history for India, for China, for the whole Asia Pacific region, really? The thought that sprang to my mind is that the CCP is struggling, and they've been struggling for quite some time. Again, very mundane, boring factors often cause dramatic shifts. And one of the most boring, mundane developments is that in the last year, the majority of the senior members of the CCP have lost so much money. They have lots stashed in businesses all over the world, and everything has been either frozen or their businesses have been suspended. Their transaction capacity has been pretty much lost. Whatever money was in bank accounts in the US, a lot of money was held in Swiss bank accounts by the CCP. So there is a lot of pressure on them. And so I think the CCP is going to experience increasing pressure. The one thing that they are the most frightened of is internal issues. They're not so worried about the external pressures. They're a very significant physical power. And so they can weather an awful lot of that. But what they can't weather is when their own population starts to turn and say, we would like answers to these questions. What the CCP leadership can't withstand is when its own senior members start to say, no, the leadership, the core leadership had made certain promises, and those promises are not being delivered. And how much longer are we going to wait for this? We're seeing the world's powers set up some sort of mechanisms for defending Taiwan on the one side. We're seeing India starting to exert, shall we say, a more muscular approach towards recognizing the people who China does not want recognized. This whole issue about the Dalai Lama being given an Indian award and a level of recognition is a shot across the bows. It's saying that we accept that this is the spiritual and temporal leader of the Tibet area. There is a move, almost a perceptible move to, so shall we say, push China back across the boundaries that it has transgressed in every direction. And so this could well be that process starting. In addition to that, Hong Kong has a role to play, and the world is also now saying we're going to soon recognize, shall we say, Hong Kong status internationally. Only a few days ago, a dear friend of mine established a Hong Kong Parliament in exile, and immediately an arrest warrant was issued for his arrest. And so there is an awful lot of attention being put and exerted upon the CCP. It's only a question of time, I think, before they implode. And Bharat has obviously decided to use soft power as well as more hard power assets in achieving this. So let's see, we're in the middle of a very hot summer with crises, shall we say, potentially appearing on so many fronts. A robust nation in the quietest, most tranquil of times struggles to maintain its own internal integrity over a long period of time. And we are seeing China with pressure on every front, economic as well as societal, as well as political, as well as naval, as well as militaristic, and now also in terms of what the world thinks about the Chinese leadership. So pressure is mounting. Let's see how long they go. I'm actually very, very hopeful. Remember, the Chinese people themselves are actually an incredible people. They are disciplined, they are hardworking, they have an incredible work ethos, they are long suffering. They have been under such stress ever since the Chinese Communist Party took over. And yet, underneath all of it, they have culture, they have civilization, they have a spiritual heritage which is deep and, in many respects, dharmic. When you see how they come together and demonstrate their collective skills, you watch, I don't know if you recall, but the demonstrations at the Olympics when they were held in Beijing, they were just such a pleasure to see humanity's talents being displayed in that manner. And that's all bubbling away underneath the surface of the atrocities and the transgressions of the Communist Party itself. It's unnatural. It can't be sustained. I'm confident it'll fall. And hopefully, Bharat can provide the straw that will break the camel's back. Or in this case, I was going to say break the panda's back, but the panda is too cute and cuddly a creature. We wouldn't want to wish any harm to pandas. But that's the sentiment. Hopefully, a little bit more pressure will cause it to implode. And that will be an incredible development.
Absolutely. Panditji, it has been a delight getting to know your insights about the recent happenings in the world. And we hope to have another session with you to know about everything else that's going to happen.
Vivavji, it's my pleasure and my honor. As I say, there's so much happening, and I'm delighted that you picked some of the most important movements and changes that are happening. And I'm really very, very much pleased to be able to share some of these insights with our audiences in Bharat as well, and the diaspora across the world. You know, we have a unique place in the history of humanity, and it's lovely that with Chitti Media, with enterprising speakers and vocal voices who are now beginning to start to make an impression, we can take a Bharatiya spin and a Bharatiya perspective to so many more people than we've ever done in the past. So thank you for the chance and the opportunity to speak. I look forward to our next conversation.
Likewise.
Jai Shri Ram.
Namaste.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.